The interior of a C-17 Globemaster III at 25,000 feet doesn't look like a cockpit. It looks like the throat of a mechanical beast glowing with a sinister, dim crimson light. In that red haze, every breath feels borrowed. We sat there, two rows of stone-faced men, encased in gear that felt more like spacesuits than combat uniforms. The constant, rhythmic roar of the four Pratt & Whitney engines wasn't just noise anymore. It was a vibration that settled deep in your marrow, syncopating with a heartbeat that was forced to race faster than humanly natural. I looked at the man across from me. Behind the visor of his oxygen mask, his eyes were unreadable, reflecting only the dull red glare of the cabin's jump lights. We looked like monsters. We looked like ghosts. My name is, well, names don't matter much when you're about to vanish into the night. I am a German paratrooper, a Fallschirmjäger. For a decade, I believed I understood the sky. I had mastered the static line, the controlled descent, the art of hitting the ground with precision and aggression. I walked into this joint training with the Americans carrying a backpack full of professional pride. I thought I was here to show them how a European elite jumps. Then came the briefing. "We aren't teaching you a jump technique," the U.S. jumpmaster had said, his voice flat and devoid of the cinematic bravado I expected. Halo, high altitude, low opening, isn't a sport. It's a way to dissolve. It's a method of haunting the battlefield before the enemy even knows there's a ghost in the room. I remember a slight cynical smirk forming on my lips back then. Dissolve? Haunting? We Germans are people of logic, of physics, of rigorous standards. We jump to fight. We don't jump to play hide-and-seek with the clouds. To me, Halo was just a longer fall. I was wrong. My arrogance was the first thing that started to thin out, long before the oxygen did. As the ramp began to crack open, a sliver of the world outside bled into the red cabin. It wasn't the sky I knew. It was an abyss of absolute black, cold enough to freeze the soul. The pressure changed, a sharp whistle piercing through my ear protection, and for the first time in my career, the sky didn't feel like my playground. It felt like an ocean that was about to swallow me whole. That night, at an altitude where oxygen is a luxury and a single mistake is a death sentence, I began to doubt everything I once held as truth. I wasn't a master of the sky. I was just a man realizing how small he truly was.
To understand why that night in the C-17 felt like a mid-air identity crisis, you have to understand where I came from. In the German military, being a Fallschirmjäger isn't just a job, it's a lineage. We are raised on the stories of Ibn Email and Crete, a history of calculated aggression and surgical precision. For years, my world was governed by the Green Devil doctrine. Our training was a masterpiece of German engineering. Every movement was choreographed, every safety check was a ritual, and every junk was a testament to order. We jumped at altitudes that were predictable, usually around 1,000 to 1,500 feet. You feel the tug of the static line, the sudden blossom of the canopy, and then you're a soldier again, steering your way to a designated drop zone with a predictable wind. It was clean, it was professional, it was safe. We prided ourselves on that safety. We believed that if you followed the manual, the sky would obey you. We looked at risk as something to be managed by a checklist. If the wind was too high, we didn't jump. If the visibility was too low, we waited. We were elite, yes, but we were elite within a framework of ideal conditions. I remember the stares of my brothers in arms back at the barracks when the Halo selection came up. We stood tall in our berets, confident in our discipline. We thought we were the peak of human capability because we could hit a target within meters after a 60-second descent. We didn't realize that our success had become a set of invisible shackles. We were so dependent on the right way of doing things that we had forgotten how to survive the wrong way. The American instructors saw right through us. While we were obsessing over the perfect tuck and the perfect landing flare, they were looking at something else entirely. They didn't care about the aesthetics of the jump. They cared about the brutal reality of the mission. "You Germans are great at jumping," one instructor told me over a lukewarm coffee, "but you're jumping like the sky is your friend. In Halo, the sky is an enemy that's actively trying to kill you for 10 miles straight. Your tradition won't keep you warm at 30,000 feet. At the time, I brushed it off as American bravado. I thought our discipline would trump their cowboy mentality. I didn't see that our reliance on perfection was actually a fear of the unknown. We weren't weak, far from it, but we were trapped in our own safety net. We were lions in a cage of our own making, and the Americans were about to throw us into the wild." The first formal briefing didn't happen in a grand hall. It was in a cramped, humid room that smelled of stale sweat and industrial cleaner. No PowerPoint presentations with flashy graphics, just a map, a few whiteboards, and a U.S. Special Forces instructor who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else but teaching a bunch of know-it-all Europeans. The Americans didn't talk about the glory of the jump. They talked about the invisibility of the insertion. For us, the jump was the climax. For them, the jump was just a silent taxi ride to the office. They introduced us to the concept of the gray zone, that terrifying space between the aircraft and the ground, where you are neither a bird nor a soldier, but a ghost. "The German way is about control," the lead instructor, a man we called Chief, said as he tapped a finger on the 25,000-foot mark. "But up here, control is an illusion you can't afford. You don't control the fall, you negotiate with it. You aren't here to be perfect, you're here to be effective." This was the culture shock. As Germans, we were obsessed with the how, the angle of the limbs, the tension of the harness, the textbook posture. The Americans were obsessed with the why. They accepted a degree of controlled chaos that made my skin crawl. They spoke of slop in the movement, of adjusting on the fly, of ignoring the fear to focus on the mission clock. "If you're worrying about how your boots look in the air, you're already dead," Chief barked. "I need you to think about the 3 miles of darkness between you and a target that wants to kill you. I need you to change your brain." It felt like a personal insult. They weren't just asking us to learn a new skill. They were asking us to dismantle our professional ego. They were challenging the very foundation of what it meant to be an elite soldier in the Bundeswehr. We wanted a formula. They gave us a philosophy of survival. I sat there, my arms crossed, feeling the heat rise in my neck. I remember thinking, they don't understand our discipline. But looking at Chief's eyes, eyes that had seen the blackness of 1,000 combat drops, a small, cold voice in the back of my mind whispered, "Maybe they just know something you're too afraid to admit." They weren't trying to make us better paratroopers. They were trying to turn us into predators who could fall from the stars without making a sound. Before the sky could test us, the chamber did. To jump Halo, you must first survive the hypoxia training. They put us in a hyperbaric chamber, stripped away the atmospheric pressure, and watched us fail. It was a clinical, claustrophobic kind of torture. As the air thinned to simulate 30,000 feet, the instructors gave us simple tasks: connect a few plastic blocks, write your name, solve basic math. For a Fallschirmjäger, these were insults to our intelligence. But then the oxygen deprivation set in. It doesn't hit you like a punch, it seduces you like a heavy sleep. I watched my hands, the hands of a trained elite, fumble with a child's toy as if they were made of lead.
I saw my German comrade next to me start to giggle uncontrollably, his face turning a sickly shade of blue-gray. He didn't know he was dying. That was the most terrifying part. The brain loses the ability to recognize its own extinction. "That's your pride leaving your body," Chief's voice crackled through the intercom, sounding 1,000 miles away. "When you're out there in the black, your mind will lie to you. It will tell you you're fine while you're spinning toward the earth at 120 miles per hour. Then came the gear. The halo kit is a heavy, suffocating cocoon. The oxygen mask is a lifeline, but it feels like a muzzle. You spend hours practicing pre-breathing, purging the nitrogen from your blood to prevent the bends. You sit there, trapped in your own head, listening to the rhythmic, mechanical hiss of your own breath. Hiss, click, hiss, click. It becomes a meditation on mortality. In the German army, we were taught to be loud, to be fast, to be visible in our strength. But in this chamber, there was only silence and the smell of medical-grade oxygen. No one talked about fear. We were too professional for that. But as I looked around the room, I saw the subtle signs, the white knuckles gripping the armrests, the frantic blinking, the sweat pooling at the edge of the masks. The pressure wasn't coming from the instructors anymore. It was coming from the realization that at high altitude, you are nothing. Your rank doesn't matter. Your history doesn't matter. Only the seal on your mask and the discipline of your lungs kept you alive. Halo doesn't break your bones, at least not at first. It breaks the illusion that you are in control of your own survival. It strips you down until there is nothing left but the raw, shivering instinct to keep breathing.
The moment of truth didn't come with a fanfare. It came with a cold, metallic thump as the rear ramp of the C-17 began to lower, revealing a rectangular slice of nothingness. At 25,000 feet, the world outside isn't the sky. It is a void. There are no city lights, no horizon, just a predatory darkness that seems to reach into the cabin to pull the heat from your bones. The red light in the bay switched to a steady, haunting green. Go. When I stepped off that ramp, I didn't jump. I was erased. The transition from the roar of the engines to the scream of the wind is a sensory explosion. In a standard German jump, you feel the comfort of the parachute opening almost instantly, but in Halo, you just fall, and you keep falling. For the first 10 seconds, my brain screamed at me that I was dying. Every instinct I had built over a decade told me to pull the cord, to find safety, to stop the madness. But the mission required us to stay clean, unseen and unheard. I was a 200-pound stone dropping through a sea of ice. The wind at that speed isn't air, it's a physical force. It hammers against your chest, trying to rip the goggles from your face and the mask from your mouth. I looked down, and for a fleeting second, I lost the up. There was no reference point, no ground, no stars, just the terrifying realization that I was a tiny speck of dust in an infinite, uncaring universe. I checked my altimeter. The glowing needle was spinning with a sickening velocity. 18,000 feet, 12,000 feet, 8,000 feet. Time didn't just slow down, it warped. I felt like I had been in that dark tunnel for a lifetime. My blood was screaming with adrenaline, but my body had to remain as still as a statue to maintain the glide. This was the American lesson. The ultimate discipline is to remain calm while the world is ending around you. At the pull altitude, I reached for the handle. A sharp, violent jerk snapped my body upright. The silence that followed was even more deafening than the wind. I was hanging under a black canopy, invisible to the world, drifting toward a patch of earth that didn't know I was coming. When my boots finally touched the dirt, not with a crash, but with a ghost-like muffled step, I didn't feel like a hero. I felt small. I felt humbled. I looked back up at the stars and realized that for the first time in my life, I hadn't just conquered a jump, I had survived a transformation. We didn't land on the battlefield. We dissolved into it.
If you think the first jump was the hardest, you're wrong.
The first jump is fueled by adrenaline and the fear of looking like a coward. The real test comes on the third or fourth night, when the novelty wears off and the what-ifs start to settle in your gut like lead. It happened during a night run over a jagged mountain range. The wind shifted, a sudden violent shear that caught me off guard. For a split second, I lost my stability. My body began to tumble, a flat spin that turns the world into a sickening kaleidoscope of black and gray. In that moment, all my German training, my years of seniority, and my medals meant nothing. I was just a man spinning toward the cold grave. I felt the panic, a hot, oily wave rising in my throat. My hand reached for the emergency handle prematurely. I was about to brake, to choose survival over the mission, to open my chute too high and reveal our position to every radar in the valley. I was about to fail not just the Americans, but my own sense of self. Somehow, I found the quiet the Chief had talked about. I forced my limbs to widen, fighting the centrifugal force until my body caught the air again. I stabilized. But when I landed, my legs weren't made of iron anymore. They were shaking. That night, in the debriefing tent, the silence was different. Usually, we Germans would discuss the technicalities of the wind or the equipment, but tonight nobody spoke. I looked at my teammate, a man I'd known for 5 years, and saw the shame's shadow in his eyes. "I almost pulled early," I whispered. It was the hardest thing I'd ever said. In our culture, admitting weakness was like admitting defeat. He looked at me, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and nodded slowly. Me too. At 10,000 feet, I forgot who I was for a second. That was the moment the professional ego finally died. We realized that Halo isn't a display of strength, it's a constant management of fear. The Americans weren't looking for soldiers who felt no fear. They were looking for soldiers who could look fear in the eye, acknowledge it, and still do the job. Halo doesn't filter out the weak, it forces the strong to be honest. It strips away the uniform until there's only the man left, and that man is often much more fragile than the medals on his chest suggest. We weren't broken, but we were bent, and in that bending we found a new kind of resilience that no German manual could ever teach.
The Americans didn't give us a certificate of completion that changed us. They gave us a mirror. Throughout the weeks of falling through the American night, I realized that their cowboy reputation was a misunderstanding on our part. We, the Germans, had a discipline of rules. The Americans had a discipline of results. I remember watching Chief before a jump. He didn't check his gear with the frantic, obsessive energy we did. He was calm, almost casual. But it wasn't laziness. It was a profound level of relaxed readiness. He knew exactly which 1% of the gear was life-critical and focused 100% of his attention there. The sky doesn't care about your rank, and it doesn't care if you followed every subclause in your training manual, he told us. The only thing that matters is, can you solve the problem when the lights go out? This was the soft discipline. It wasn't about shouting or standing at attention. It was about absolute personal accountability. In the German system, we often relied on the leader to make the call. In the American Halo doctrine, once you leave that ramp, you are your own commander. You are responsible for your own oxygen, your own navigation, and your own life. They taught us the value of calculated risk. In Germany, we often avoided risk to preserve the perfect record. The Americans taught us that avoiding risk is sometimes the greatest risk of all. If you don't push the boundaries of what's possible, you become predictable. And in war, being predictable is a death sentence. But the most important lesson was about trust in the dark.
When you are falling at terminal velocity with 3 other men, you can't see their faces, you can't hear their voices. You only see the dim infrared strobe on their packs. You have to trust that they are doing exactly what they whispered they would do back in the hangar. That trust isn't built on shared regulations, it's built on shared danger. I realized then that they weren't trying to make us less German. They were trying to add a layer of American flexibility to our German structure. They showed us that true elite status isn't about never falling. It's about how you manage the descent when the parachute doesn't behave. "You're not just a paratrooper anymore," Chief said on our final night. "You're a silent partner of the wind." We walked away with more than just a new badge. We walked away with the understanding that strength isn't just about how much you can endure, but how much you can adapt. The Americans didn't change our uniforms, but they fundamentally rewired the way we looked at the horizon.
There comes a moment in Halo training where the procedure vanishes and instinct takes over. It's a quiet, internal shift. You stop counting seconds and start feeling the air. By the end of the course, my relationship with the sky had undergone a radical reconstruction. I no longer looked at the clouds as obstacles or the wind as an enemy. They became my terrain. In the German army, we were taught to conquer the environment. The Americans taught us to inhabit it. I remember my final blind jump. No moon, no ground references, just the GPS coordinates burned into my brain. As I fell, I realized I wasn't thinking about the manual anymore. I wasn't reciting step 1, step 2. My body was reacting to the subtle shifts in air pressure before my brain could even process them. If my left wing dipped, my right hand corrected it instinctively, like a bird adjusting its feathers. This was the redefinition. To the outside world, a jump is a loud, dramatic event, the glory of the Green Devils. But to us, it had become an exercise in extreme subtlety. We learned that the most effective way to enter a combat zone wasn't with a roar, but with a whisper. We weren't dropping anymore. We were threading the needle through miles of empty space. I began to perceive time differently. In the beginning, 60 seconds of freefall felt like an eternity of panic. Now, it felt like a workspace. I had time to check my teammates, scan the horizon for infrared signatures, and adjust my glide ratio to hit a landing spot the size of a backyard. The fear hadn't disappeared, but it had changed shape. It was no longer a paralyzing weight. It was a sharp, cold energy that kept me focused. It was the predator's edge. I remember landing on that final night, rolling into the grass and quickly packing my chute into a small, unrecognizable lump. I stood there in the absolute silence of the American wilderness, and for the first time I didn't feel the need to celebrate. There was no high five, no shouting, just a silent nod to my American counterparts. We had moved beyond the how to jump and arrived at the when to appear. We had learned that true power in modern warfare isn't about who has the biggest explosion, but who can arrive at the most critical point at the most impossible time without leaving a single trace in the air. The sky was no longer a place I visited. It was a path I had learned to walk in the dark.
When I touched down at the air base in Germany, the air felt different, thick with the weight of tradition. I was wearing the same camouflage, carrying the same beret, but I felt like an alien in my own barracks. I returned to my unit not just with a new qualification badge, but with a virus of American pragmatism that began to itch under my skin. The first briefing back was a reality check. I stood in front of my platoon, men I had bled with, and tried to explain what I'd learned. I saw the familiar faces, the skepticism in their eyes, the rigid posture of those who believed our way was the only way. "The Americans don't do it by the book," one of my senior NCOs remarked, his voice laced with a hint of disdain. They're messy. We have a standard to maintain, Hauptfeldwebel. It was a wall of pride. To them, the American way looked like a lack of discipline. They didn't see the soft discipline I had discovered. They only saw the deviation from the German manual. They saw the mess, but they didn't see the mission. I remember a specific training jump we conducted shortly after my return. The weather was marginal. Low clouds, shifting winds. In the old days, I would have been the first to call for a no-go. I would have waited for the perfect window. But now, I looked at the clouds and saw an opportunity. "We're going," I said. The pushback was immediate. "It's not within the safety parameters of the 1998 manual," they argued. "The enemy doesn't read our 1998 manual. If we only jump when it's safe, we're just athletes in uniform. We aren't ghosts." I began to implement small, subtle changes. I stopped focusing on how the paratroopers looked in formation and started focusing on how fast they could disappear after hitting the ground. I pushed them to breathe through the panic, to trust their gear, but rely on their instincts. It was a slow, agonizing process of breaking down their perfect shell to find the adaptable soldier underneath. There was resistance, even anger. Some thought I had gone Hollywood. But then came the results. During a multinational exercise, my messy team reached the objective 20 minutes faster than the perfect units, moving through a storm that others deemed impossible. In the silence that followed our success, the skepticism started to melt. I realized then that my mission wasn't to turn them into Americans. It was to show them that our German discipline was a foundation, not a ceiling. I had to teach them that sometimes, to truly serve the tradition of the Fallschirmjäger, you have to be willing to set the manual on fire and trust the man falling next to you in the dark.
One of the most profound realizations I had didn't happen in the air, but in the silence of the ready room before a night jump. I looked at the young soldiers under my command and realized that leadership in the Halo world is fundamentally different from leadership on the parade ground. In the light of day, you lead by voice, by posture, by presence. But at 25,000 feet, in the freezing dark, you lead by trust. When you are the first one out of that aircraft, you aren't just a jump master, you are a beacon of calm. If your breath is ragged over the comms, they will feel it. If your hand tremors as you check their seals, they will panic. To lead in the shadows, you must first master the shadows within yourself. I learned that leadership means being the one who absorbs the collective anxiety of the group. You become the anchor. You don't have to have all the answers. The sky is too chaotic for that. But you must have the unwavering resolve to make a decision when the standard operating procedure fails. I remember a jump where a young trooper's oxygen mask partially froze. I saw the flash of terror in his eyes, the kind of terror that leads to a fatal mistake. In the old days, I might have barked an order. Instead, I simply grabbed his shoulder, looked him dead in the eye through our visors, and slowed my own breathing. I showed him the rhythm. I didn't say a word, but I communicated the most important message a leader can give. I am here, and we are not dying today. He calmed down. He survived. That is the leadership of the abyss. It's about being accountable for lives you cannot see. It's the terrifying weight of knowing that your choices in the next 60 seconds will determine who goes home and who becomes a memory. In the American doctrine, they call it extreme ownership. It means that if something goes wrong, it's on you, even if it was the wind, even if it was the gear, even if it was God himself. You don't make excuses, you find a way. I realized that my job wasn't to produce perfect soldiers, but to produce resilient ones. I wanted men who could lead themselves when I wasn't there, because in the middle of a halo drop, every man is his own commander.
If you haven't built that character in them on the ground, the sky will rip them apart. True leadership isn't about being the strongest, it's about being the one who can find the path when everyone else only sees the blackness.
In an era of drones, satellite surveillance, and hypersonic missiles, some might ask, why still jump? Why put a human body through the meat grinder of 30,000 feet? The answer I found, somewhere between the American doctrine and the German tradition, is that technology is a tool, but the human spirit is the weapon. Modern warfare is asymmetric. It doesn't always happen with tanks on a field. It happens in the gray zone, the spaces where you aren't supposed to be. A drone can see, but it cannot feel the tension in a village or make a split-second ethical call. A missile can destroy, but it cannot secure. Halo remains the ultimate silent entry. It is the way we keep the human element in the most unreachable places. Working with the Americans showed me the power of interoperability. It's a dry military term, but in reality, it's a beautiful thing. It means that a soldier from a small town in Bavaria and a soldier from the plains of Texas can fall through the same dark sky, use the same signals, and trust each other with their lives without ever having met before. Our alliance isn't just about treaties signed in ink, it's about the blood oath of shared training. When we share the oxygen in a C-17, we are merging our fates. I also realized that the high-tech nature of Halo is a paradox. Yes, we have carbon fiber helmets, GPS altimeters, and sophisticated parachutes, but at the moment of exit, you are as vulnerable as a paratrooper in 1944. All the technology in the world is useless if the man wearing it hasn't been forged in the fire of discipline and fear. We aren't just operators of machines, we are the masters of our own physiological limits. The lesson for the future of warfare is simple. We can build better sensors and faster planes, but we must never stop building the man. The more complex the battlefield becomes, the more we need soldiers who can navigate the silence, who can survive the void, and who can arrive, unseen and unexpected, to change the course of history. Halo is the ultimate reminder that even in the age of AI, the most sophisticated computer on the planet is still the one sitting inside a soldier's skull, fighting to stay calm at terminal velocity. I am back in the civilian world now, or at least my body is. I sit in cafes, I walk through parks, and I watch people look up at the clouds with a sense of wonder, or perhaps a slight annoyance at the coming rain. I look at the sky, and I see a different map. I don't see weather. I see exit points. I see glide ratios. I see the invisible currents that can either carry a man to his objective or tear his parachute to ribbons. The sky is no longer a vast, empty space above my head. It is a memory of the most honest moments of my life. I have a confession to make. I don't jump the old way anymore. Even when I'm on a standard training mission with a static line, the German way I once held so dear feels incomplete. The Americans didn't just teach me a technique, they stole my ability to be satisfied with the safe and the perfect. They gave me a hunger for the edge. People ask me if I was ever afraid. The answer is every single time. But that fear is a gift. It's the only thing that reminds you you're alive when you're falling at 120 miles per hour through a freezing void. I've learned that the greatest heights aren't measured in feet or meters, but in the distance you travel within yourself when everything you thought you knew is stripped away. I am a Fallschirmjäger. I carry the tradition of my grandfathers and the discipline of my nation, but I also carry the ghost of that American C-17, the red lights, the smell of bottled oxygen, and the silent brotherhood of men who choose to vanish into the night. To those who serve, and to those who dream of the jump, do not fear the fall. Fear the life where you never had the courage to step off the ramp.
The ground will always be there to catch you, but it's in the falling that you truly learn how to fly. The sky is never the same once you've learned to haunt it. I've landed now, but a part of me, the best part of me, is still up there, somewhere at 25,000 feet, waiting for the green light to blink in the dark.